Hey, can I ask why you look sweaty and unsettled?
I was just by the riverside, officer. It's really sunny today.
I'm looking for a suspect in a serious case. You match the description we were given. Male, tattooed. Let me see your ID.
Tattooed isn't a description. That's a category.
You don't tell me how this ends.
The accusation lasted less than 30 seconds on a recorded dispatch channel. An officer's voice. Controlled. Deliberate. Subject matches description of rape suspect reported in the area this morning, requesting backup at Riverside Trail North Entrance. The dispatcher asked for the report number. There was a pause. Still pending. There was no report. There was no description. There was no rape suspect. There was only a 19-year-old black man walking a public trail with headphones on a spring afternoon, doing nothing that any law on any book in any state had ever classified as a crime. That 30-second radio transmission would cost Officer D. Morgan his badge, his freedom, and ultimately his future. It would cost his union $11 million in a lawsuit so catastrophically misconceived that the judge's written dismissal was read aloud on the floor of the state legislature. It would expose a pattern of racially motivated stops along the Riverside Trail that had been invisible for years, invisible because no one had ever looked at them together. And it would result in the most significant police reform legislation the state had passed in 2 decades, signed into law by the man whose stepson Morgan had just accused of rape on a running body cam. Benjamin Murray was not famous. He was not protected in any visible way. He was a 19-year-old college freshman in the sleeveless hoodie and over-ear headphones who had found a stretch of Riverside Trail that felt like his. Open sky, moving water, the particular peace that comes from being somewhere green and unhurried when the semester is almost done. To the officer who pulled over, he was something else entirely. A young black man with a tattoo on his forearm in a space Morgan had spent years deciding needed monitoring. A problem to be checked, an easy stop. To the body cam that recorded every second, to the phone in Benjamin's hoodie pocket that had been streaming live for 11 minutes before backup arrived, and to the federal jury that reviewed all of it 8 months later, they were exactly what the evidence showed them to be. Riverside Trail ran 4 miles along the eastern bank of the Calhoun River through the heart of the city's greenway system. On spring afternoons, it filled with joggers, cyclists, dog walkers, and college students stretched out on the grass with their textbooks. It was city property, public land, open to every resident regardless of anything. Benjamin had started coming here in September, the first week of his freshman year, when the campus felt too loud and the dorm felt too small, and he needed somewhere that didn't ask anything of him. He had been walking this trail for 8 months. He knew which bench had the best river view. He knew which section of path went quiet in the afternoon when the joggers thinned out. He knew the older man who fished from the same spot every Tuesday and always nodded when Benjamin passed. He belonged here the way you belong somewhere after 8 months of showing up, quietly, completely, without needing anyone's permission. That afternoon he was wearing the dark sleeveless hoodie because it was warm enough to want the air on his arms. The headphones were over-ear, the music loud enough to feel it. His phone was in his front pocket. His only plan was to walk to the North Bend, sit by the water for 20 minutes, and head back before dinner. Officer D. Morgan had been patrolling the Riverside Trail corridor for 3 years. His stop record over that period showed a pattern that no single incident review had ever been asked to explain. 17 stops of young black men along or adjacent to the trail, 0 arrests, 0 citations, 3 complaints filed by stopped individuals, all 3 marked insufficient evidence and closed without further review. He had never been asked why he kept stopping people who turned out to have done nothing. He had never been asked to account for the numbers. Nobody had looked at them as numbers. Each one had been its own isolated file, filed alone, dismissed alone, filed and forgotten. He saw Benjamin from the patrol car. Headphones, sleeveless hoodie, the easy, unhurried stride of someone who had somewhere comfortable to be. In 3 years of patrolling this corridor, Morgan had developed what he considered reliable instincts. He considered this one of them. He pulled the car to the curb. He reached for the door handle. He had already decided before his feet touched the pavement, the same way he had decided 17 times before, and 17 times before had walked away without consequence. The body cam on his chest activated with a soft click. The recording had begun. What Morgan did not know, and would not know until it was far too late to matter, was that Benjamin Murray's phone was already in his hand. Benjamin Murray did not think of himself as someone with a powerful stepfather. He thought of himself as someone who had grown up at a dinner table where certain conversations happened whether you wanted them to or not, where accountability wasn't a talking point, but a standard, where the question, "What did you do about it?" followed every story about something that was wrong. His stepfather had been in public office for most of Benjamin's adolescence, and what that had given him, more than access, more than any door it opened, was a working vocabulary for how systems operated and why they so often failed the people they were supposed to serve. By 19, Benjamin could walk you through Terry over Ohio without notes. He had read the Fourth Amendment the way other kids read sports statistics, not because anyone made him, but because the dinner table had made it feel relevant. He was pre-law at the state university, first year, second semester, 3 weeks from finals. The Riverside Trail was where he went when the library felt like a ceiling and the dorm felt like a box. 4 miles of path along the Calhoun River, green and wide open, the kind of place that didn't require anything from you. He had found it in September and had been coming back ever since. That afternoon, he wore the dark sleeveless hoodie because it was warm enough to want the air on his arms, and he hadn't felt like changing after his morning workout. The headphones were over-ear, the good ones, the ones with the deep bass that made the music feel less like listening and more like being inside something. He had the volume high enough to close out the world without closing out the river, which was a specific calibration he had gotten good at. His phone was in his left pocket. He had no particular destination, just the North Bend, the bench with a good view, maybe 20 minutes of sitting before he walked back. He was not thinking about anything important. He was thinking about a chord progression he'd heard that morning, and whether the dining hall would still have the pasta he liked at this hour. He was thinking about nothing, which was the entire point. The trail was sparse that afternoon. A cyclist who passed without looking up, a woman with a stroller moving in the opposite direction, the older man in the green jacket who fished from the same spot every Tuesday and nodded the way he always nodded. Benjamin nodded back the way he always did. It was an ordinary Tuesday in April. The sky was the particular blue that only appears for about 3 weeks each spring before the heat takes over. He had no reason to believe it was anything else. D. Morgan's patrol record looked clean at first glance. No excessive force complaints that had gone anywhere, no disciplinary actions on file, performance reviews that used words like diligent and community-aware and proactive in identifying concerns, 3 years on the force, assigned to the Greenway corridor, and nothing in his jacket that would have flagged him in any routine audit. He looked on paper like an officer doing his job. The problem with paper is that it only shows you what someone chose to write down. What the paper didn't show, because no one had ever been asked to look at it this way, was the sequence. 17 stops along or adjacent to the Riverside Trail over 38 months. All young black men. All stopped for reasons Morgan's reports described with phrases like suspicious demeanor, inconsistent with surroundings, appeared to be monitoring foot traffic. None of them arrested. None of them cited. Not one stop had produced a single piece of evidence that anything had been wrong in the first place. 3 of the 17 had filed complaints. Each complaint had been reviewed by a different supervisor, in isolation, with no reference to the other 2, and each had been closed with the same notation: insufficient evidence of misconduct, officer's account consistent with department policy. 17 stops, 0 accountability. 3 complaints that had each died alone in a file drawer because no one had ever laid them side by side and asked what they added up to. Morgan had patrolled this corridor for 3 years and had learned, in the way that people learn things that are never said directly, that his judgment here was trusted, that the trail attracted a certain kind of concern from residents who lived in the adjacent neighborhoods, that proactive engagement, his supervisor's phrase, not his, was encouraged. He had internalized all of it so completely that it no longer felt like bias. It felt like experience. It felt like knowing what to look for. He was running a standard afternoon loop when he saw Benjamin ahead on the path. Sleeveless hoodie, over-ear headphones, the relaxed, unhurried stride of someone who had nowhere urgent to be and no particular awareness of being watched. Young, black, moving through the trail with the easy confidence of someone who belonged there. Something about that, the ease specifically, is what made Morgan slow the car. He told himself it was instinct. He told himself that instinct in this job was the same thing as experience. He reached for the door handle before he had formed a complete thought, before he had identified anything articulatable, before he had asked himself a single question that the law would have required him to answer. He had already decided. He always had. Morgan was out of the car before Benjamin heard him coming. The first thing Benjamin registered was the patrol car at the curb, Lights off, engines still running, and then the officer already moving toward him with the particular stride that meant the decision had been made somewhere before the conversation started. Benjamin pulled one headphone off his ear. He did not step back. He did not reach for anything. He stood the way his stepfather had told him to stand since he was 14 years old. Visible hands, steady eyes, voice at a normal register. ID. Let me see it. No greeting, no explanation, no sir or excuse me or anything that acknowledged Benjamin as a person rather than a situation to be processed. Can I ask what this is about? ID. Now. Benjamin's voice stayed level. I'm on a public trail, walking. You need a reason to demand my identification, and I'd like to know what it is before I provide anything. Morgan's expression didn't change. You matched the description of someone we're looking for in this area. What description? Silence. Benjamin looked down at himself. Sleeveless hoodie, headphones around his neck now, the small tattoo on his left forearm, his grandmother's initials, done on his 18th birthday. He looked back up at Morgan. Is it because of my tattoo, he said, or because I'm black? The body cam caught Morgan's jaw tighten. It caught the half-second where he didn't have an answer and didn't try to find one. It caught everything that came next. Morgan's hand moved to his radio. What he said into it, calm, deliberate, on a recorded channel, was the moment the confrontation stopped being a bad stop and became a crime. Subject matches description of rape suspect reported in the area this morning. Requesting backup, Riverside Trail, north entrance. Benjamin went very still. There was no rape report. There was no description. There was no suspect. Benjamin knew this the way he knew everything his stepfather had taught him about how power operates when it feels cornered. It escalates. It fabricates. It reaches for the most damaging available accusation and uses it like a weapon. Morgan moved forward. The cuffs came out. Benjamin's left hand went into his hoodie pocket before Morgan reached him, not to resist, not to retrieve anything Morgan could misread, to press the button on his phone that he had set up for exactly this kind of moment. Record, stream, contact list. His mother was third on that list. She picked up on the second ring. She didn't say hello. She heard the radio transmission still echoing in the open air, heard her son's voice saying, "I'm being detained," and she was already dialing the governor's office before Morgan finished closing the second cuff. Benjamin said it the way you say something you've never had to use before. Not as a threat, not with any particular emphasis, just a fact, offered quietly, the way you offer the last piece of information available when every other piece has been ignored. You'd hear from my stepdad. Morgan laughed. It wasn't a long laugh or a loud one. It was the short, dismissive sound of a man who has heard 100 variations of "Do you know who I am?" from people who turned out to be nobody in particular. The body cam captured it perfectly. The exhale, the slight shake of his head, the expression of someone who considered the conversation beneath him. Benjamin didn't repeat it. He didn't explain it. He stood with his hands cuffed in front of him on a public trail on a Tuesday afternoon and said nothing else, because there was nothing else to say. The phone in his hoodie pocket had been streaming for 11 minutes. His mother had been on the line for 9 of them. She had heard the fabricated rape accusation in real time. She had heard her son's voice, steady, careful, giving Morgan every opportunity to find a way back from what he was doing, and she had spent the last 8 minutes on her other phone, working through a contact list that ended at the governor's chief of staff. The chief of staff called the precinct captain directly. Not the desk, not dispatch, the captain's personal cell, which rang twice before he picked it up in the middle of a late lunch and listened for 45 seconds without interrupting. The backup unit was still pulling into the Riverside Trail parking area when the captain was already in his car. He arrived 12 minutes later. He stepped out, read the scene in the particular way that senior officers read scenes, taking in Benjamin, the cuffs, Morgan's posture, the small gathering of trail users who had stopped at a distance and were watching, and said nothing immediately. He asked Morgan his body cam device. Morgan handed it to him. The captain rewound to the radio transmission. He listened to Morgan's voice, calm and deliberate, fabricating a rape report on a recorded channel in real time. He watched the body cam footage of Benjamin's face when he heard it. He watched Morgan laugh at a name he didn't recognize. He handed the device back. The trail was quiet. A bird moved through the trees above them. The river kept going the way rivers do, entirely indifferent to what was happening on its bank. Go sit in your car. Don't touch your body cam. Don't call anyone. Don't say anything to anyone until I come to you. Morgan opened his mouth. Now. The evidence existed in 5 places before Morgan finished his shift. The body cam had been running from the moment his feet hit the pavement, the soft click of activation catching everything from the first approach, the demand for ID with no cause attached, the radio transmission with the fabricated rape accusation delivered in the same measured tone Morgan used for routine traffic stops. Time-stamped, continuous, unedited. The kind of footage that leaves no interpretive room because it doesn't ask you to take anyone's word for anything. It simply shows you what happened, in sequence, from the perspective of the man who made every decision. The dispatch recording was its own category of damage. Morgan's transmission had gone out on a logged channel at 4:17 p.m. Subject matches description of rape suspect reported in the area this morning. And the dispatch system had archived it automatically alongside every other communication from that shift. When investigators cross-referenced the transmission against the actual call log for that date, what they found was a gap where the report should have been. No rape call, no suspect description, no incident number pending or otherwise. The report Morgan had cited on a recorded channel did not exist at 4:17 p.m. It did not exist at any point before or after. He had spoken it into being on a running microphone and apparently believed that would be sufficient. Benjamin's phone had captured everything from a different angle. Audio from inside the hoodie pocket, slightly muffled but entirely intelligible, beginning 30 seconds before the body cam and running 6 minutes past it. It caught things the body cam's positioning missed. Morgan's exact words during the cuffing, the laugh, the precise silence that followed Benjamin saying his stepfather's name. A recording made not in anticipation of anything specific, but in the knowledge absorbed over 19 years at a particular dinner table that documentation was not paranoia, it was preparation. The live stream had been viewed by 23 people on Benjamin's contact list in real time. 17 of them had screenshotted it. 11 had saved the full recording locally before the stream ended. By the time Morgan was sitting in his patrol car on the captain's instruction, the footage existed on 11 private devices held by 11 people who had no obligation to delete anything and every reason not to. The governor's legal team filed a formal preservation demand with the precinct, the dispatch center, and the city's records division at 11:48 p.m. Body cam footage, dispatch logs, call records, Morgan's full service history for the Riverside Trail Corridor going back 38 months. There was nothing left to lose. There was nothing left to find that hadn't already been found. There was nothing left to bury because 17 people had already made copies and the governor's lawyers had already made it illegal to try. The union authorized the lawsuit on a Thursday. By Friday morning, it was the lead story on every news outlet that had been covering the case. The theory behind it was straightforward, in the way that bad ideas are sometimes straightforward. Morgan had been publicly identified. The body cam footage had been characterized in the press in terms that his union considered prejudicial. Benjamin's live stream had been viewed, by that point, by several million people. The union's position was that Benjamin's recording and his subsequent public statements had damaged Morgan's professional reputation and interfered with a legitimate law enforcement action. $11 million in damages, obstruction, defamation. The suit was designed to do 2 things: shift the narrative and make Benjamin's family calculate whether the fight was worth the cost. It did neither. It did something else entirely. Discovery is the part of civil litigation that no one thinks about when they file a lawsuit in anger. It is the process by which both sides are legally entitled to examine the evidence the other side holds. When Morgan's union filed against Benjamin, they handed the prosecution a mechanism they hadn't need to build themselves. The discovery requests went out, and the responses came back. And what came back was everything. Morgan's full service record for 38 months on the Riverside Trail Corridor. 17 stops documented in sequence for the first time, laid side by side in a single exhibit. The pattern undeniable in a way it had never been when each incident sat alone in its own closed file. 0 arrests across all 17. 0 citations. 3 complaints, each dismissed in isolation by a different supervisor who had never been shown the other 2. The text messages came out in discovery. a chain between Morgan and 2 patrol colleagues running back 14 months, discussing the trail in terms that removed any remaining ambiguity about how he understood his role there. One exchange, sent 6 weeks before the incident with Benjamin, used the phrase "cleaning up" twice in 4 messages. The prosecution read it into the record at trial. The jury heard it once and didn't need to hear it again. The judge dismissed the civil suit in 4 pages of written opinion. She did not write like a judge trying to be measured. She wrote like someone who had read every document in the file and wanted the record to be clear. The suit was described as an attempt to weaponize civil litigation against a minor who recorded his own detention. The dismissal was filed on a Tuesday. It was read aloud on the floor of the state legislature on Wednesday. 6 weeks later, the criminal trial began. The prosecution's opening exhibit was Morgan's own union's discovery production. They hadn't built the case against him. His union had built it for them, bound it, and filed it with the court. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: false imprisonment, filing a false police report, civil rights violations under color of law. Morgan stood motionless as each verdict was read, the same controlled stillness he had carried through the trial, though it looked different now, less like composure and more like a man who had run out of available postures. The sentencing memorandum was 41 pages. The judge had clearly written it herself. It moved through the evidence methodically: the body cam, the dispatch recording, the 17 prior stops, the text messages, and it arrived at the $11 million lawsuit with something that read less like legal analysis and more like controlled fury. The union civil suit against Benjamin was cited directly as evidence of consciousness of guilt. The attempt to use litigation to punish a minor for recording his own detention, the memorandum noted, was not the behavior of an officer who believed he had acted appropriately. It was the behavior of a man who understood exactly what he had done and chose intimidation over accountability. The lawsuit was cited again at sentencing as an aggravating factor. The document Morgan's union had filed to silence Benjamin had added time to his sentence. He was remanded into custody the same afternoon. The governor signed the Benjamin Murray Public Safety Act 11 weeks later. The legislation mandated body cam preservation for every stop resulting in detention, automatic independent review of any stop where no arrest or citation followed, and a publicly accessible database of stop and identify incidents broken down by officer, location, and race of the individual stopped. No more patterns hidden in isolated file drawers. No more 17 stops reviewed as 17 separate events that happened to involve 17 different people. The data would be visible. The sequences would be visible. The next Morgan would not have 38 months to operate before anyone looked at the numbers together. Benjamin stood beside his stepfather at the signing, sleeveless hoodie, headphones around his neck, the same ones, the over-ear ones with a deep bass, because someone on the governor's communications team had suggested it, and Benjamin had agreed because it seemed right. His expression was the same one the body cam had captured on the trail: composed, unhurried, looking directly at whatever was in front of him without flinching. He finished his first year of college 2 weeks later. He walked the Riverside Trail that same afternoon. The older man in the green jacket was in his usual spot. He nodded the way he always nodded. Benjamin nodded back the way he always did. Morgan's $11 million lawsuit, the document designed to bankrupt a teenager's family and punish a 19-year-old for pressing record, was framed and mounted on the wall of the state attorney general's office. Not as a trophy, as a reminder of what happens when intimidation becomes evidence, of what happens when the system assumes the person it targets has no record running, no contact list waiting, no dinner table behind them where accountability was treated as non-negotiable, of what happens when you laugh at a name you don't recognize and the name turns out to matter less than the phone already in the pocket. Morgan is incarcerated. The trail is public. Benjamin walks it every spring. If this story held you from the first line to the last, if it made you think about who gets believed, who gets recorded, and what happens when the wrong person decides you don't belong somewhere you've walked 200 times, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Stories like this one exist because real people refuse to be quiet. We tell them because silence is how patterns survive. If you want more stories about ordinary people who faced extraordinary injustice and made the system answer for it, subscribe right now. There are more. Every single one matters, and we're just getting started.